Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation we're doing over the web with Sound Productions and Shure Incorporated on digital wireless and the advantages of using that in today's RF world. My name is Clayton Mills. I work for a company called Highway Marketing. We're the manufacturer's representative here in Texas. We work with Sound Productions in behalf of our manufacturer, Shure, to provide training and sales support. And so I'm going to take you through the advantages of digital wireless today, a little bit on frequency coordination. I want to mention that we do have a chat window open, and I can see that there's several employees from Sound Productions monitoring that chat. So if you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat window. I'll pause periodically throughout the presentation to address any questions that come up, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. I'd also like to take a moment on behalf of Shure and Highway Marketing to thank Sound Productions for making us their inaugural presenter on their first YouTube stream ever. So we're very honored to be a part of this today. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. So by now, you're probably asking yourself, wow, Clayton sounds really good. What microphone is he using? Well, I am actually using a Shure microphone, which I'm sure that's really hard for everyone to believe, knowing that one of the sponsors of this webcast is Shure. But I'm using a TwinPlex microphone, and this is the TH53 headset microphone. This was introduced in 2019. It's an ultra lightweight premium headset designed for comfort, ease, and fast adjustability. It's really designed for broadcast, corporate events, presentations, and theater. It's got a really adjustable frame. You can get it down to the size of a child head all the way up to the largest of adults. It's got a very innovative clutch system that quickly allows you to adjust the length and pitch of an element without having to bend the arm like so many other manufacturers. You can also switch sides very easy. You can pull that arm out and flip it over the other side. Comes in a variety of colors, black, tan, and cocoa, and we have all the connectors available on the market, including Shure and microdot connections and other ones available. So one of the things that makes this microphone really unique is that Shure designed it with an omnidirectional dual diaphragm. So some of the advantages of this is that it gives you twice the surface area of a lot of competitors' same type of product offering. So we get a real low frequency response that's nice and robust and flat, a very natural high frequency response. It also has a very good off-axis consistency. So especially on the lavalier versions of these microphones, it makes it much easier to get into place on the speaker to get a good placement of the microphone. So often lavaliers are challenging to get in the right spot to get a good pickup pattern. So this really does make it easy. It's also got extremely high dynamic range and a really low noise floor. And it's been made through cabling in the diaphragm to be resistant to a lot of RFI, which is what we'll be talking about today. So it works really well with digital body packs. Also, these cables that we use with the TwinPlex microphones have a new design from Shure. It uses a double helix cable technology with redundant grounding. So it really lasts hundreds of times longer than any other of the competitors' products on the market. Shure spent years developing just this cable. It has zero memory effect. It comes in two versions, a ultra thin 1.1 millimeter, which is more for film and broadcast applications. And of course we have a standard 1.6 millimeter diameter as well. Another interesting characteristic about this microphone is that we provide frequency caps to go over the diaphragm, and they slide on and off. We have a couple of different kinds. We have a natural response and a presence peak, but these are nano-coated frequency caps, so they have a super hydrophobic coating that helps protect against sweat and moisture. So these really are perfect for environments that you might have an actor, actress, or other performers who are sweating a lot, costumes and things like that. And so these microphones are designed to stand up in that type of environment. So if anyone has any questions about these, feel free to talk to us later or get with your sales representative at Sound Productions. I'm sure they can provide you more information on the TwinPlex product line. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the main crux here. So we're going to be talking about digital wireless today. Of course, this technology has been on the market for many years now, and Shure really did lead in the marketplace with introducing the digital wireless technology through its ULX digital platform. pretty much nearly a decade ago at this point. I think it was around 2011. And we're also going to address a little bit about the 600 megahertz transition and how digital wireless really does shine with all of its attributes and pros in these type of environments. So we'll discuss the advantage of digital wireless. We'll talk a little bit about the UHF spectrum range and why that is such a preferred place to operate wireless microphones. We're going to do a little bit of an update on the spectrum, and then we're going to touch on some frequency coordination so you can really see some of the differences between analog and digital wireless in the marketplace. So, wireless audio is a very important part of our industry. It goes way back in the history of Shure. Here's an interplant correspondence between Benjamin Bauer, who coincidentally is the same engineer in the 30s who designed the first dynamic unidirectional microphone capsule, which of course became the Unidyne and later developed into the SM57 and 58, which is the most popular microphones in the world. But here he is sending an interplant correspondence where they're talking about developing a wireless microphone. And he has two concerns here, one of which is patent matters. Of course, all manufacturers care about that, but also what will the FCC say, right? So here we are 90 years later. Actually, this is 1947. So, anyway, quite a bit of time later, 7 decades later, and we're still dealing with the FCC. Also like to throw this in, Shure actually came out with the first commercially available wireless microphone in the 1950s. It was called the Vagabond microphone. You had to run a loop of conductive cable around an area and keep the microphone within that area for it to operate. It weighed 1 pound, was 12 inches long, and if you were to add up what it costs in today's money versus what it was sold for in the 50s, this microphone would cost $6,900 today. So wireless microphones have always come with a cost. And of course, the better. Sometimes it's a little bit more expensive, but we've definitely managed to make things more affordable since the 1950s. When you look at the wireless landscape today, there's a lot of challenges. So there's a lot less spectrum available, especially since the recent 600 megahertz auction and the repack of the TV stations in metropolitan and TV markets all across the country. We also have a lot more devices and therefore possible interference. And our user expectations from customers and clients is increasingly complex productions with more and more wireless channels and really no tolerance for failure. So it does put a lot of expectations on the people who provide wireless services to their clients. So digging in a little bit to digital and analog wireless, let's talk about the advantages of digital wireless first. It has a better audio quality. It's going to have a wider, flatter frequency response, increased dynamic range and signal to noise ratio, less audible artifacts, which is really important. Not to mention, it's much more spectrally efficient, so we can do a lot more systems, which is really important today since we have such a crowded RF landscape in our country right now. We also have an improved RF performance as well. There's less intermodulation products, and digital wireless offers better resistance to multipath and interference than analog systems do. Also, we can encrypt digital wireless very easy, and this is of concern for a lot of customers who require security whenever they're using their wireless microphones. So looking at some of the technologies in analog wireless that had to be developed to make it work, that really kind of, point out the difference between the advantages of digital and wireless, the first thing we're going to talk about is how analog wireless overcomes noise in the environment. Inherently in the RF environment, there's a certain amount of trash or just noise out there caused by all the different types of products that emit EMI and RF interference potentially. And a lot of this really occurs more in the audible high frequency range. So analog systems use a method of pre-emphasis on the transmitter and de-emphasis on the receiver. What this means is they add a certain predicted amount of high frequencies on the transmission side, which the receiver then demodulates on the reception side to overcome the noise in the environment. This is really similar, for those that remember analog tape recording, to what Dolby and DBX and other people did to reduce noise on tape machines. But the result is that you do have a little bit alteration of the audio quality coming into the receiver. So this slide shows the difference between an analog wireless signal and a digital wireless signal, and how noise affects those two signals as it travels through the air as an RF wave. So if you look at the top line there, that's the carrier frequency. Every wireless microphone has a carrier frequency. And of course, it's transmitting an audio signal. And the analog does this in an analog audio signal, a sine wave, to make it simple for the point of this illustration. Whereas a digital audio bit stream is what a digital wireless microphone carries. So you can it's a series of zeros and ones to represent that same audio wave in an analog signal. Now, as those are transmitted through the air and modulated, they come across noise in the RF environment. You can see how the modulated signal on the fourth line looks a little bit different than what is sent out from the transmitter. The result when you demodulate that audio signal in an analog system is that you do get a little bit of distortion potentially in different areas of that wave. Whereas when you demodulate it in digital wireless, you get the exact same bit stream that you had before you transmitted that signal. So it's a much truer to representation of the actual signal that is being transmitted once it's demodulated by a digital wireless system. Another characteristic of analog wireless is modulation or deviation. So every wireless microphone, analog or digital, has a carrier frequency. Main difference in analog and digital is that that carrier frequency is very narrow when there's no audio signal present. But as the amplitude and frequencies are increased, that signal has to modulate. So it's the same thing with an FM radio station. It modulates out to represent the changes in amplitude and frequency from that original carrier signal. Now, the FCC states that you can only take that signal so far. A wireless microphone can only transmit up to a certain width of a signal. The advantage of the digital wireless is that since it's just transmitting a digital bit stream, it doesn't actually have to modulate like an analog signal does. So we're able to space them much closer together. And we'll look at this a little bit later when we talk about spectral efficiency. But, this often brings about the question of what happens when an analog signal needs to modulate further than the FCC says it can. Does it just stop with what it can do in representation of amplitude and dynamic range? Well, no, it doesn't. Manufacturers for many years use a process called companding. So basically, on the transmitter side, the signal is compressed down to a point where it won't modulate beyond a certain width, according to the FCC rules and regulations. And then at the receiver side, that audio is expanded back to get to the original dynamic range. Now, one characteristic of companding is that it can produce some audible artifacts. And of course, whenever you hear compression in audio signal or expansion audio signal, you do risk the result if it's not done right with getting some other audible artifacts. The pumping, the type of sounds that people hear from compressors and expanders that aren't set right. There's really two types of companding ratios. The older method was a fixed threshold and fixed ratio kind of scenario, which didn't provide for as much dynamic range or high quality signal level as the newer version, which kind of uses a variable threshold and a variable ratio. But the main point here is that analog wireless has to use companding in order to meet the restrictions of keeping that modulated signal within a certain width, whereas digital wireless does not. It just changes the values of the bit stream to more ones, for example, to get a higher dynamic range. So that's a real huge difference, especially when it affects the audio quality of that wireless signal, digital versus analog. Something else that digital wireless does that analog can't do is when we talk about true diversity in a receiver. So most wireless products these days are true diversity, meaning they have an antenna A and an antenna B. In an analog system, it's going to switch between those two antennae based on which one gets the best signal. But with Shure's products like the Axient digital system, we actually take the information from both antennas and encode those as bit streams in the receiver, of course. So you get a representation from antenna A and antenna B. Those are then summed together, and if there's ever a dropout or a little bit of a part of that bit stream that's missing, because you have two bit streams coming in from each antenna and we're doing error correction, you can recreate that bit stream very effectively, which is a much more robust RF performance in a digital true diversity receiver versus an analog receiver. So another advantage of it. I mentioned encryption earlier. This does come up in a lot of corporate events or government type events where people don't want someone in a van outside tuning in to the wireless signals to try to listen, which is possible in an analog world. So in digital, it's very easy to encrypt a digital signal by putting a 256 or 128-bit encryption key at the beginning of that bit stream that then only the receiver that is synced to that transmitter can decipher because it has the key. So it's a very robust way of providing encryption. In a lot of our products, this is automatically turned on, like Microflex Wireless for corporate conferencing. But in the based wireless systems like QLX Digital, ULX Digital, and Accent Digital, it's a feature that can be turned on or off. You do pay a little bit of a penalty when you turn on encryption. It does add a little bit to the latency. So we've talked a lot about the pros of digital wireless. Let's talk about the con of digital wireless. That's latency. And this is the time it takes for something to process through digital to analog conversions. An analog signal is going to be instantaneous. There is no latency. But in digital wireless, you do have a little bit of latency because of those conversion processes that are happening. So for example, ULX Digital is 2.9 milliseconds. Accent Digital is just a little under 2 milliseconds. This can change if you're using the Dante or the analog outputs. Of course, if you're using a Dante output, that minimizes the time to convert back to analog, so you don't have to do that. But when these are added together with digital mixers and digital processors, you begin to build system latency throughout the whole thing. And anything really less than 5 milliseconds is ideal, but it is possible through other pieces of equipment to exceed that 5 milliseconds of latency, where it starts to become irritating, at least for trained performers and vocalists with in-ear monitors in that 5 to 10 millisecond range. And then as you increase the latency even further, then you start to get into a situation where the audience can tell that it's a little bit off. It really starts to affect what's being done now. The good news is the Shure digital products like QLX Digital, ULX Digital, and Accent Digital, at most, even in high density mode with encryption turned on, are going to be a little less than 3 milliseconds. Most of your modern generation of digital consoles are now measuring latency in microseconds, not in milliseconds. Of course, you do have some digital signal processing, especially if you're getting that signal out to an amplifier or a loudspeaker. That's going to add more latency. But if you're just going back to that mixer into an in-ear monitor transmitter system, with our digital products, you're going to stay beneath that 5 millisecond range, which is definitely tolerable. So we talk about digital wireless being, a lot of pros over analog systems. And if you have a lot of analog wireless systems and you're thinking about changing over to digital, you have to ask yourself, what else do you have to change, or what part doesn't change? Well, the antennas and the accessories are the same. So as long as it's a UHF-based antenna product, be it the antenna or a splitter or an amplifier or something like that, it's going to continue to work with the digital product just like it did with the analog product, because it's just looking for a frequency range within that UHF area. Now, I will mention we do make some of these products in VHF, and in that area, you do need different antenna and accessories, but we haven't really made any analog wireless in a long time, nor have other manufacturers really that exist in the VHF range. So we're kind of revisiting that with our QLX Digital and ULX Digital products. But in general, if you have a lot of analog wireless products already and you're going to switch over to digital, it's a really, really easy switch over because the infrastructure is the same. Even the antenna distributors can be the same. Now, with our ULX Digital dual and quad products and the Accent Digital dual and quad products, we do have some cascading. But if you start getting into high receiver channel counts, you do need to use antenna distribution for a lot of reasons to provide unity gain throughout the whole system. But if you already have existing UHF-based antenna distribution, you're able to just continue to use that with the digital products. And the cabling stays the same as well. The cable from the antenna to the distributor or to the receiver is still an analog signal, whether or not it's being transmitted digitally. So once it's been received there at the antenna is when it's converted. So anyway, this shows some different lengths of cable here and the typical loss you get over certain ranges. The longer you run a cable, the higher gauge or quality of cable you're going to need to minimize the loss of the cable. You want to keep it less than 5 decibels, between 0 and 5. Anything beyond 5 decibels of loss, we need to start looking at antenna amplifiers and things like that to boost the signal to make sure that the receiver gets the adequate signal that it does have. So if there's any questions about that, throw them in the chat room, and I'll come back to that in a little while. I want to talk about the spectrum as it's changed recently and the 600 megahertz auction. Excuse me. So what drove the auction? Well, if you look at the way Americans use devices now, only about 14% of the United States is still watching TV over antenna-based reception of the digital TV stations. Let's compare that to 81% of people in the United States of America own a smartphone. Many of us have more than one smart device, be it a tablet, a work phone, a personal phone. So, the number of devices out there is very, very high. And that's created a huge demand from the mobile broadband companies to provide more spectrum for higher speeds, for faster data transmission, streaming video, watching movies, all these things that take up more bandwidth. So it started in the late 2006, 2007 with the 700 megahertz auction, where the government auctioned off part of the UHF band to mobile broadband companies and allowed them to purchase that. And several companies like AT&T and Verizon did get a lot of that spectrum. And then it was introduced in 2012 that they were going to do another auction of the 600 megahertz area. So if you look at the spectrum range that the FCC regulates, and we really hone in, UHF area originally was about 470 to nearly 800 megahertz. That was chopped down to ending at 698 after the 700 megahertz auction. And then more recently, it's now been scaled all the way back down just to the lower 600s. But that is prime oceanfront real estate, as we like to say in the wireless technology world, because the propagation of UHF waves is very good compared to other things. They can get through some walls in some cases. They can move further distances. And so it's ideal for a lot of types of technologies, not just wireless microphones. But we have enjoyed this space for a long time, and now we're just increasingly having to share it with other people. So you can kind of look here at this range. There's so many technologies in here, but that is the UHF range right there as it exists in the United States. If we look at the transition timetable, so when the auction ended in 2017, in July or so of that year, FCC released their channel reassignment notice. So what happened is all the stations that had been broadcasting in the portion of spectrum that was auctioned off, which is the 600 megahertz range, as we more commonly say, had the option of either going off air or getting a new TV assignment in a lower part of the spectrum. And most TV stations in the United States chose to do that. Of course, part of the cost of paying for that transition and equipment and everything else was provided by the money raised during the auction. But anyway, a lot of these TV stations are transitioning to new channel assignments. And this started in 2017 and is continuing in 10 phases. Every TV market in the United States was assigned a phase. Every TV station was assigned a phase to complete that transition by. Now, if you look at this timeline here, we're nearly done. Everything was supposed to have been done in phase 9 by May 1st. The current situation with COVID-19 has delayed some of the TV switching, so there's still some stations on air in parts of the United States that need to relocate to new assignments in phase 9, and the same thing in phase 10. But the point is, we are nearly done with the whole transition, and this is really good for the wireless microphone users, because even though we knew where those channels were going to be when they reassigned, we didn't necessarily know the signal strength and some things like that. So now that they're all pretty much transitioned with the exception of some stuff in phase 9 and 10 in certain cities, it really allows us now to really use the spectrum that we have left over. So we just want to dive in a little bit more on what that spectrum is before the auction, after the 700 megahertz auction, and then before the 600 megahertz auction. So basically what we had for the last decade and stuff. The UHF band was from 470 megahertz to 698 megahertz. The only things that were allowed to operate in that area are digital TV stations, wireless microphones, and when it says other devices, we're talking about wideband devices or white space devices, which in general haven't really been developed as much as we thought they were going to be 12 or 14 years ago. So now, after the auction, basically everything from 614 megahertz to 698 megahertz was sold off to the mobile broadband companies. And then that leaves us now with some reduced space. So it doesn't look like necessarily a whole lot of spectrum. I mean, maybe about 25% of our spectrum was lost. But where this really becomes important is when you start to look at the way TV stations are allocated. So looking at this slide, you can see that new area of mobile broadband between 616 and 698 megahertz up there. In a lot of markets, those used to be TV stations. So those TV stations have now moved down into between 470 and 614, where there were other TV stations as well, but it's a much more densely packed area on TV stations. Now, wireless microphones are allowed to legally operate in any empty TV station, or now under the new ruling, if the measured signal strength of a TV station is less than negative 85, you can operate a wireless microphone within that venue to show that to the FCC. So that is now legal, but it still doesn't leave a lot of operating area in a lot of major markets in the United States. And we'll look at some scans from Dallas and Miami here in a few minutes, and you'll see just how congested with TV stations this has really become. But I do want to point out a couple other interesting areas here. So there is something between 614 and 616 called the guard band. And this is between the bottom of the downlink band for 600 megahertz mobile broadband and the top of TV channel 37, which is reserved for medical telemetry and radio astronomy. So we're not allowed to use that channel, although it often does look empty when you scan. That is illegal to use. So there is a little sliver of 2 megahertz where we can slide some wireless microphones in. And there's also something called the duplex gap between 653 and 663 megahertz where we can put in product too. Now you will notice that there are some regulations within that area. So in the normal TV channel area, the maximum signal strength of a unlicensed wireless microphone is 50 milliwatts. And licensed ones can go all the way up to 250 milliwatts. If you look at that guard band and duplex gap, the FCC capped that transmission strength to 20 milliwatts, which, if anyone wants to take a guess, what's the maximum transmit power for a ULEX digital transmitter? It happens to be 20 milliwatts. So it is possible to use some products within that guard band. In fact, we have a new band for our BLX analog, which is our introductory analog wireless systems called J11 that actually operates in that part of that guard band range there. So it definitely opens up some more spectrum for us. And in many places, it's very needed, especially in crowded cities. Currently, there's really about 5 areas of spectrum that we use and other manufacturers use as well to some extent for our wireless microphone technologies. Now, UHF, like I said, has always been the oceanfront real estate, but VHF is often used, especially indoors. It can be a very valuable space. There is some stuff in the 900 megahertz band, either 902 to 928 or up in the 940 to 950 range. Although that's an unlicensed area, so you need to be careful before you start buying wireless or using wireless to do enough research and scanning to make sure it's going to work in that area. There's something that goes between 1.9 gigahertz roughly. That's called the DECT band. DECT stands for Digital Electronic Cordless Telephones, back when we used to use those in our homes. We have a product called Microflex Wireless. It's more of a conferencing product, but it does exist in that range, which is nice because it doesn't have to worry about all this TV shuffle that's going on in the UHF area. And then there are some microphone technologies that deploy in 2.4. Of course, they're sharing that with Wi-Fi and other unlicensed products. That's a very dense, crowded range, which creates its own issues and challenges to operate efficiently there. Although we do have some technology with our GLXD Advanced product and the frequency manager that really helps navigate that 2.4 gigahertz range. I think I want to look at some scans now so you can start to look at the way things actually look out there in the world. This is the anatomy of a TV channel. When you look at a digital TV station on a scan, it's got a very clear shape to it. You can see the peak at the beginning of the transmission signal, and you can really see the shape of that signal. Those are digital TV stations, easily recognizable. You'll see they co-align there on the bottom of the screen to channel 16, 17, 18, and 19. In the United States, those are 6 megahertz wide. In Europe and some other countries, they're 8 megahertz wide, but here in the US, they are 6 megahertz wide. Now let's look at an example of Miami, Florida after the TV repack. So what you're looking at here is at the bottom, you're looking at channel 14, which is the beginning of the UHF area, 470 megahertz, all the way up to channel 37, which is reserved for radio astronomy and medical telemetry. And we can see all the TV stations there. Most of them exceed that horizontal red line. That horizontal red line is the exclusion threshold in wireless workbench software, and we'll look at that in a second, but that's set at negative 85 dB, which is really the point where If something from the noise floor exceeds that level, you don't want to operate, or you won't really be able to operate a wireless microphone successfully all the time in that position. So you can see in Miami, there's not a lot of empty TV stations left. Now you see something over in channel 14 that doesn't look like a TV station. That's because it's not. Those are emergency broadcast. And in Miami, Florida, channel 14 is actually reserved for public emergency broadcast services. And so that's what you're seeing there is just emergency type related stuff. But so that channel is unusable. You basically have 15, 20, 33, 35, and 36. So just 5 empty TV channels to operate in. You might be able to, depending on where you're at, to operate in 16 and 17 as well, since they are beneath that negative 85 threshold there. So this brings us into talking a little bit about coordination. It's very, very important. Always has been, but the more wireless systems you're using together, especially in the more crowded RF environment that we're looking at today with less available TV stations, especially in major markets, it's more important than ever. And so frequency coordination is a way of planning all of your wireless devices, microphones, in-ear monitor transmission, transmitters, comm, anything that exists in range that might coincide with each other or have an impact on each other, to avoid outside interference, like a digital TV station, and also to avoid system-to-system interference, so we don't step all over each other. And we're going to look a little bit more at this in a second, but I want to show you a couple different things here. This is an example of a very clean noise floor. You notice you really don't see many TV stations peeking out, so this is probably somewhere fairly removed from a major metropolitan area, somewhere away from digital TV transmitters, and you can see the signal strength of a microphone transmitter there. It's plenty of signal and noise ratio there, which, by the way, is going to increase your range quite a bit. The better your signal and noise ratio, the better your range from transmitter to receive antenna is going to be as well. And now we'll look at something completely opposite. This is a very noisy RF environment. So if you really look at the slide, you can see that characteristic of the digital TV stations. And so, those are radio frequency interferers or known interferers. You can also see some very linear lines there that represent, like right here, this is a wireless microphone or in-ear monitor transmitter, probably here and here. So those are known devices because we can either coordinate for those or look for them, or they're ones that we're already operating. But you also see quite a bit of electromagnetic interference. And this happens in areas with a crowded RF environment, and can become very, significant enough to interfere with wireless microphones should they approach this exclusion threshold area here. So this is definitely an example of a dense RF environment. Looking a little bit more at analog versus digital wireless too, every wireless microphone system has to have a unique frequency, right? Believe it or not, we get this question all the time from people. Can I have 2 transmitters and 1 receiver operating on the same frequency? And the answer is yes, but not at the same time, right? You could have a body pack and a handheld. You could have one or the other turned on, and it would work. But the moment you turn those on, you're going to have 2 transmission signals, and those are going to interfere with each other. So wireless microphone systems and in-ear monitor transmitters have to be spaced far enough apart from each other that they don't interfere with each other. And different types of wireless microphones, from analog to digital, different manufacturers, different make and model within those manufacturers, have different channel spacing requirements. In general, because analog signals, remember, have to modulate as more amplitude and frequency are introduced, they require more spacing than a digital wireless system. The digital wireless system is a very linear transmission signal, whether it's receiving full amplitude frequency adjustment or it's just a silent transmitter. It doesn't deviate much. So that's another advantage as we start talking about spectral efficiency. Another thing that is an advantage of the digital wireless products is when we start talking about intermodulated distortion. So there's a phenomena that occurs when you have multiple transmitters, and if you get them within close proximity together, they create a side frequency. It's called an intermodulated product. And there's a whole mathematical algorithm you can use to figure out what these frequencies are going to be based on what the carrier frequency of the transmitter is. But if you look here on the right side here, this is a screenshot of an oscilloscope showing some of these intermods. When you take these 2 primary transmitters, they create at even intervals, you can see these other products. Now, the thing is, those other products could potentially interfere with another wireless microphone if they're either tuned to that carrier range or tuned too close within its channel spacing requirements. So those intermods can actually cause interference as well. So it's a very important part of frequency coordination and setting it to work correctly. If you look at the way analog and digital respond to intermods, this is an example of 9 transmitters that are analog and 9 digital transmitters, and they're all spaced about 6 feet apart from each other. You can see in the analog slide here that we do have some IMD products starting to pop up out of the noise floor. Over on the digital side, though, it's just pretty squeaky clean as we go across the bottom there. Now, if we move those transmitters closer together, which this slide shows them about 8 inches apart, look what happens to the noise floor in the analog side of things. You have a lot of IMDs, so much so that it's actually raising that noise floor up above a usable level, really, and you're going to have interference problems if you try to introduce more transmitters, or potentially even with the ones you have as they move further away from the receiving antenna. Whereas on the digital side, we still don't have any IMD products that are peaking up out of the noise floor. It doesn't mean that they're not there. They're just not a problem. They're much more minimal of an impact in a digital wireless system, which once again leads us to have more wireless systems on air than we can do with digital systems. More digital systems on air than we can do with analog systems. One thing when you're using wireless microphone systems, and this is something manufacturers have been doing for many, many years, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about groups and channels. Groups and channels are a pre-selected way to have multiple systems that are compatible with each other, that adhere to the channel spacing for that product, and also don't create any IMDs within that group. And this is fine to use as long as you're only using a single manufacturer's product and the same product in the same frequency range. The moment you start mixing, different frequency ranges, for example, SLX G4 and SLX G5, those groups and channels no more, they no longer line up. The same is true if you have multiple manufacturers' products together, or even multiple types of products. So for example, if you're using Shure Ulix Digital with some Shure SLX, the groups and channels are not going to be the same. You can no longer rely on those as soon as you move past that point. So we have technology, software, and other things available to help calculate these compatibility lists. And we use Wireless Workbench software at Shure. It's something that Shure has developed, and I'm going to show a little bit of an example of this. But the great thing about this is it allows you to use multiple manufacturers' products, multiple make and model from a manufacturer, multiple frequency ranges, and still calculate the minimum channel-to-channel spacing, as well as observing, channeled intermod spacing and avoiding your digital TV interference. Also, a very useful tool on Shure's website is the Wireless Frequency Finder, and this is something that we make available so you can punch in a zip code. I'll show you this in a second, the type of wireless you're using, kind of tell you how many you can use of each product within a certain frequency range based on the TV stations. Other resources that are available from Shure would be, the user guides, which are all available on pubs.shure.com. We have a whole online training program, including an advanced wireless class that's available on our Shure UCAN's Shure Audio Institute training site. Wireless Workbench has 6 YouTube videos, and we have a whole FAQ database as well. So there's a lot of available resources on the web for you to use. So let's just look at a couple of those real quick. Give me one moment to transition here. I'm going to start with the wireless frequency finder that I mentioned. So this is something I was looking at yesterday for somebody. I've left it pulled up here. Dealing with something in Stephenville, Texas. Customers looking at buying BLX stuff. So this tells you, how many per frequency band that you can do. Now, this assumes, like I was talking about with groups and channels, that you're only using that frequency band. As soon as you start adding more frequency bands, for example, if you're mixing H10 and H11, that doesn't mean you can do 12 of each. It means that either just H10 you can do 12, or H11 you can do 12. But once you start mixing those together, you really need to look at some coordination software like Wireless Workbench to make that happen. But if you are staying within one particular frequency range, it does show you, how many channels you can do and what group and channels to put those on. So this is a very useful tool for a lot of things. It also shows you the unavailable TV stations as opposed to the available TV stations. You can see in Stephenville, it's about 80 miles west of Dallas-Fort Worth, so there's not a lot of radio out there. Now let's just go look at the zip code for downtown Dallas. This is going to change quite a bit here, and I'm just going to keep on with the example of BLX. Notice that changed a lot, right? We go look at our unavailable and available TV channels. For some reason that's not open. Oh, here we go. All right. The unavailable list now exceeds the available list. Also worth mentioning that the available TV channels shown up on here, some of those are in the 600 megahertz range, so they will become or are becoming part of the T-Mobile range of wireless. There's another really good resource I use quite frequently to determine what TV stations in there are in an area. This is on fcc.gov site. It's the digital TV reception maps. So this will show you every TV station on air in specific relation to a certain address. So if I type in the address to our office, and hit go, it's going to pull this nice map. It shows all the TV stations here as well. If I click on a TV station, it shows me the channel, the repack channel, whether it's repacked or not, with those dates down here at the bottom, the signal strength, the tower distance, and the direction to where we're located there. So you can really get a good picture of what TV stations could potentially cause you a problem. Now notice once again, Dallas is very dense with TV stations, especially in that particular location. Most of them in major cities tend to come from approximately the same area, where the transmitters are located. So that's a great tool as well. That's on fcc.gov. Just look for digital TV reception maps, and you can find that. The other tool, and the last thing we want to get into today, is our wireless workbench software. So you can download this for free. It works on both Mac and PC-based computers. We just upgraded to a new version of it too. So if you haven't updated lately, you might want to check that, because there is a new version that's some significant new features on it. I also want to point this out right now, that if you're thinking about moving to digital wireless, you'll notice we do have the switch to digital Shure promo going on through the end of July now. So that's an instant rebate on QLX Digital, ULX Digital, and Accent Digital. If you have any questions about that, you should contact your Sound Productions sales manager or sales associate, and they can fill you in on the details. But you do have an option of getting an instant rebate on any of those products as long as you purchase them before the end of July this year. So the next thing we want to just kind of look at is, I want to do a demonstration here of analog versus digital wireless. Give me one moment. There we go. All right, I went ahead and loaded some scan data from a scan I did in March in downtown Dallas. So once again, we were looking just now at the online frequency finder for Shure, and we were showing all the digital TV stations that are on there. So you can see that it doesn't just say that, it's true. There's not a lot left here. You've got 15, 17, 20 is the low power, but it's well beneath this negative 85 mark, which is what we call the exclusion threshold. Channel 22, same. Channel 26, same. 37 is blocked off for radio astronomy. You can see T-Mobile operating up here already in the 600 megahertz area. So those services are on air now. They're definitely using that spectrum that they bought a couple years ago. So it doesn't leave a lot of room to operate. Now, I'm going to assume that people here have a basic knowledge of wireless workbench software, but if you don't, I would encourage you to download the software. As I mentioned, there are several YouTube videos available that you can watch. Both on Shure's channel, we have some on the Highway Marketing channel. There's a lot of information out there, or contact your sales associate at Sound Productions, and we can arrange to maybe do a little bit more work on wireless workbench. But one thing you need to do, even if you don't have the scan data, you can still do this. You need to go in and search the TV stations from where you want to use this product. And what this is going to do is search as a database that Shure is connected to through our online frequency finder, actually. And it's going to pull up and automatically block off all the TV channels that are occupied in that locality. So here we are. We can see these are checked. Now, sometimes I'll go to the FCC website and I'll go ahead and confirm that that's the case. For example, 28 should be checked. We know that's a TV station operating, and we can also see that clearly on the scan data there. So I'm going to go ahead and block these off. Notice when I do that, what happens is it puts these red bars across the frequency coordination window there that blocks those channels off from coordinating wireless to within those channels. So, just to do a little bit of illustration between how digital and wireless, analog wireless work and how much more efficient digital wireless is spectrally, I'm going to start by showing you some of the equipment profiles for different types of products. So I won't pick on any of the manufacturers. I'll just go ahead and look at Shure products here. I want to start by looking at, for example, our BLX product. So if we choose BLX in the H10 band, and we come over here and look at filtering and intermod calculations, you'll notice that the channel spacing here is 1250 kilohertz at more robust settings, or at least 950 kilohertz in kind of a standard mode. And it also shows you the spacing that it wants to put between the various intermods, whether they're 2 transmitter or 3 transmitter, and different subharmonic orders of those. So you have robust or standard settings there, which you can change. So just kind of keep that in your mind right there. And let's go look at another very popular analog product for a long time, which is the Shure SLX system. And move over here and look at G4. Now, that's actually an older technology than BLX, so you'll notice that the spacing is even more on SLX analog. And then I'm going to go to what was Shure's premium flagship wireless for a long time, which is the UHFR product, which is listed on here as UR4. Where is it at? UR4, for example. Let's look at G1. Notice the spacing is way reduced here. This is an analog product, but it was our premium analog product for a long time. And then the last thing I just want to look at then while we're examining this is let's go ahead and look at a Ulux digital receiver and G50. And notice the intermod products. Look at the difference here. Now the spacing stays about the same in standard density mode, but the intermod products change quite a bit between the UHFR. So if I'll go back and look at the UHFR product, for example, notice that my intermods do creep back up here. Let's go back to Ulux Digital real quick because I want to show you what happens when we put this in high density mode. So standard density mode for our digital products, you can operate 17 wireless systems in an empty TV channel. Moving into high density mode, we can get up to 47 systems in a TV channel. So look what it does to the spacing between the channel. You don't lose any audio quality. The only penalty you pay is a slight bit of latency. You add about a millisecond of latency in high density mode. But this allows us to pack hundreds of channels into places we could only otherwise do, possibly 30, 40, 50 systems in a crowded area. So let's look a little bit at just running some numbers here with some different types of analog and digital products. So I'm going to start by selecting some of the SLX product here. Let's go with G4. Let's say we're going to see if we can get 8 of those, and going to move over to G5, see if we can add in 8 of those. H19. You'll notice one new characteristic of the wireless workbench software is they just added, it shows you the frequency range now, which is a new feature, so you can see where that overlaps empty TV channels. So notice G4 has 2 empty TV channels, G5 has 1, H19 only has 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit calculate. Let's see how many channels we can pull up. So I requested 24 channels. Of course, we saw earlier that the spacing between channel and SLX system is really about 1.2 megahertz apart. So there's just not a lot of room. The software is going to give me, if you look down here, it's going to give me 13 out of 24 systems requested. So, now there is one little sliver we could go in here. We're not using channel 22 at all. So I could add a little bit of H5 in there, and I could squeeze a couple more channels out of there probably. So I'm up to 14 out of 32. So that's really the cap in Dallas-Fort Worth for using SLX systems, for example, in the same location. So I'll go ahead and stop that calculation. I'm going to delete this workspace, and I'm going to go ahead and step up over here to the U product, the old UHFR. Passed it though. There we go, UR4D. So let's throw some, once again, let's try, actually, let's try 12 and G1. You can see it actually overlaps quite a bit of channels. I bet we can actually do a little bit more than that even. Might be able to get to 20 altogether in that range. And then we're going to go look at the old H4 band, and let's see if we can maybe squeeze in about 16 there. So I'm now asking for 36 channels of what was the premium analog wireless from Shure up until Accent Digital was released a few years ago. I'm going to hit calculate here. I've got 30 out of 36. It's pretty good. It's nearly 3 times as much as I was able to do with the SLX products in multiple frequency ranges. But still, you know, maybe we need more than 30 channels of wireless, right? So let's go ahead once again and going to delete our workspace. Now we're going to go look at the ULX digital product from Shure. And I'm just going to start off in standard density mode, which is 17 systems per channel. And G50, I'm going to go ahead and request 40 of those. And the other frequency range that will work in this area is going to be H50. And I'm going to ask for, you know, there's only one TV channel there, so let's ask for 24. And now I'm going to run calculate here. So we've already exceeded the UHF wireless by twice in standard density mode. So we're up to about 52 channels of ULX digital in standard density mode in 5 TV stations. It's still calculating. There's some other things you can do. You can relax the compatibility to more frequencies. You can minimize the third transmitter intermod products in the calculation. But anyway, just in standard mode, standard density, we're now up to 52 channels of wireless. So twice as much as the most premium analog wireless system we've ever done. Now, if we clear this out and we go into high density mode, this is where it gets really pretty amazing. So I'm going to go back to G50. I'm going to change the RF profile to high density. I'm going to ask for 80 channels in G50, and I'm going to ask for 50 channels in H50. And remember, we had a little over 60 before with standard density mode. And calculate. All right, we're already up to 92, 93 channels in high density mode. Like I said, we can definitely do a few things in the coordination software to get even more channels, but that's all in one room simultaneously. You know, that's now 3 times as much as the premium analog wireless, the UHFR, and nearly 10 times as much as the SLX systems. So that's really it for the presentation. If you're interested in learning more about the Wireless Workbench software, you know, please feel free to go online and download it. We encourage you to do that. There's a lot of YouTube videos and resources available. There's wireless training on Shure Audio Institute website as well. You can just search the Shure Audio Institute and come up with that. So I'm going to look over here at the chat window now and see if we've got any questions. I don't see any here. I must have done a fantastic job this morning. If anyone has any questions, I'm on about a 30-second delay from the YouTube stream, so I'm going to watch here for a moment. Once again, we want to thank Sound Productions for inviting us to be the inaugural participant of their YouTube channel. It's an honor to do that. And just going to watch here for a few more minutes. See if there's any questions. I am not seeing any questions, so that's great. Well, once again, we appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to interacting with you in the future. Everyone stay safe, and hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.